I'm Danny Haiphong. Thank you so much for sending me your questions. I am going to answer them the best that I can. I'm going to answer these one or two at a time, and so I appreciate your patience as I get these videos. One of the questions that came up was the question about why people in the United States may not feel comfortable with surveillance technology. Why is it that in China people feel safe and secure with such technology and they believe that it is necessary, while there may be people in the United States who feel differently and who see surveillance technology employed by the US government as something that's undesirable? And I think it really does get at some critical differences between China and the United States that not many people here in the United States understand. For one, in the United States, privacy and individualism are a really important value. They're really important principles, and they don't necessarily have a progressive side to them. So on the one hand, it is true, individuals in the United States should have a right to privacy. But on the other, when that right to privacy goes against the collective society, goes against the interests of the collective, then that's when individualism runs amok and causes problems in addressing huge issues and crises like, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's something even bigger at play when it comes to opinions on surveillance, and that is that the US government has employed surveillance, has employed technology, especially since the war on terror was declared in 2001, in a manner that is not really about ensuring safety as much as it is about instituting social control in the United States. And I think that a lot of people in the US are actually scared of their government, and there are many reasons for this. One, police departments around the country kill 1,000 people per year. Two, the US government collects the data of every single citizen here in this country, every single person who uses any form of technology, sends it to private companies without their permission, and also uses it to follow those who may be seen as subversive. How the US government sees subversive is different from China. So while in China there have been terrorist attacks in places like Xinjiang since well before 2001, in the United States, a lot of this surveillance technology is said to be stopping terrorism, but really what it does is that it actually targets vulnerable groups. So vulnerable groups include black people. Black people are heavily surveilled, and they end up majorly incarcerated to a point where there are nearly as many black Americans in prison, and dare I say more black Americans in prison and within the criminal justice supervision system than in all of China, despite the US having a fourth of the population, as well as the black American population being roughly 13 to 15 million people. When we're talking about surveillance here in the US, there are different opinions and negative opinions about it because of the way that the US government employs it and who it serves. So in China, according to Harvard studies, around 90% of people support the government in China. Here in the United States, roughly 10% of people support Congress. And why would that be? Well, it's because surveillance technology does not go toward meeting people's needs, does not go toward keeping people safe. Actually, the US has become a lot less safe as the war on terror has progressed. We see mass shootings happen every day. We see the fact that people in the United States don't have health care access, so something like COVID-19 can become a huge problem and has killed hundreds of thousands of people here. In China, surveillance technology was used for the benefit of the people. We saw how artificial intelligence was used to keep people safe, to trace contacts so that people knew who was infected with COVID-19 and thus could be quarantined, and then ultimately the infection rate could be controlled. Here in the United States, none of that happens. Surveillance technology is really about keeping majorities of people, ordinary people, tracked so that the rich can benefit. And so I think that's where the US and China are different. China employs surveillance technology to benefit the entire country, while the US employs surveillance technology not only to trace and track majorities of people so that their movements can be followed, so that social movements like Black Lives Matter, like Occupy Wall Street in 2011, and even whistleblowers like Julian Assange, so they can be kept under control, so that real movements for justice are not allowed to strengthen and have an influence in society. And the difference in China is that when surveillance technology is employed to keep the population safe and to ensure that the plans of the central government, as well as the plans that are being enacted in various counties, provinces, that they continue without disruption. One of the huge misconceptions I think that people in the United States have is that they believe that surveillance is even worse in China and that it has the same purpose in the United States. Well, when I was there, it was pretty obvious what the surveillance was all about. It was about keeping public spaces safe. It was about ensuring that the people of China could go to work, could make their livelihoods, and could continue to build upon the progress that they've made since 1949, especially in the last 40 years, that all of that would be kept safe. I did not get the sense that the police were following people. Most police in the cities did not have weapons. China pays attention to the needs of its people. I believe, and from what I've both seen and read, is that in China, the government and the people are not separated. That there is this idea that the government is ours. Here in the United States, the government is seen as a separate entity, protecting property and keeping in place inequality, racism, endless war. The notion and the need for safety is very real. The way that the US treats whistleblowers, treats journalists, treats social movements, and ultimately treats everyone who lives in this country is that of a potential terrorist. And that's a problem when you have so many issues that need to be resolved that working people just are struggling with, whether it's poverty, 8 million more in poverty since the pandemic here, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the fact that climate change is destroying the earth. There's so many issues, right? But people in the United States don't have the power to determine those, and surveillance is seen as an outside force that is keeping all of this in place, keeping this injustice in place. So I'm going to just close by saying that people in the United States really need to understand that context is important, that China has its own set of reasons and needs and interests that surveillance technology is employed to achieve, while in the United States there are another set of interests, another set of objectives to achieve, which needs to be our focus. That should be our principal focus. The only thing we should be thinking about in relation to China and surveillance is, well, why is it that there is such an information gap between China and the United States? Why is it that people in the United States know so little about China? And I think that is really where the issue of surveillance in the United States needs to be addressed. Then the question must be asked, why is China, despite being framed as this so-called surveillance hub, why is it that most people in China understand what's going on around the world, especially when it comes to how the United States is behaving? If there's such an information gap and the society is so closed, why is it that China is one of the most globalized, if not the most globalized country on earth, politically, economically, in all realms? So with that said, I hope that this video helps you understand why people in the United States may have varying views on surveillance, and why anti-China sentiment and anti-China propaganda turns this question into, well, China is worse than the United States. Well, my answer, China is different from the United States. And honestly, when it comes to this question of surveillance technology, I'd rather it be used how it's used in China here in the United States than how surveillance technology is currently used here in this country. And so thus, I think we have a lot to learn from China.